Scripture to consider before the news. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. We are still in the 69th week for Israel's prophetic program written in the book of the prophet Daniel, and the 70th week has not started. God is still dispensing His grace to the world so He can justify you by His grace, through faith in His only begotten Son, Jesus. And He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week He shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations He shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. The He referenced as the Prince of the Covenant that confirms a covenant with many for 1 week, which is approximately a 7-year span. In the middle, after 3.5 years of initially making that deal, it will be broken, and then the last half of the final 70th week begins. The prince looks to simply be Prince Mohammed bin Salman, because using gematria we can see in the prime cipher that the number of his name is the number of the beast of 666, because the prince in the book of Daniel is the beast of Revelation. We are getting closer and closer to that 70th week being started and getting to the last half of Israel's final prophetic week, which is called the time of Jacob's trouble and the hour of temptation, because you will be tempted to receive the mark of the beast to buy or sell. Receiving the mark is the unforgivable sin. This corona scare is to prepare the minds for the mark of the beast and destroy world economies for the one world mark of the beast currency. Now unto the news. Gulf states anxiously await results of upcoming Israeli elections. Abraham Accords and a change in U.S. administrations have all raised the level of uncertainty ahead of Israelis going to the polls. As Israel prepares to go to the polls, some states in the Gulf region are anxious for change, while others believe the stability of another term for current Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would be better for the region. It has been a historic year for the Middle East, which has seen United States brokered normalization agreements signed between Israel and both Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, as well as Sudan and Morocco in North Africa. A new U.S. president makes a potential change at the top in Israel all the more uncertain. The Abraham Accords, negotiated under the Donald Trump administration, heralded a new era for the Middle East, but with Biden now keen to bring the most feared regime in the region to the table, namely Iran, anxiety levels for many are high. Samuel Cardillo is a Belgian-Israeli security expert based in the United Arab Emirates. He says that this election, more than ever, matters for the Gulf and wider Middle East. It always mattered and matters even more this time, he said. The Middle East is clearly shaped by Israeli politics, and because there are such specific ties between the US and Israel, how Israel behaves also dictates how the US will behave in the region, and the military operations to be made. Not only have there been huge changes in the region since the last elections in Israel due to the historic Abraham Accords, with the increasing fears of Iranian aggression as recently as the Friday attack on an Israeli vessel in the Gulf of Oman, it is a critical time. We are at a decisive moment with Iran, and there are so many changes in trade and the economy too, Cardillo, founder of Shadow Break International, said. He predicts that it will be only a short time before Netanyahu naturally steps away from politics, after decades at Israel's helm. Netanyahu will jump out of the political game very soon, and there will be change from his government to the new one, he said. While Israeli society needs and wants that drastic change, it will indeed have a ripple effect on the region and on the US, now keen to get Iran back to the negotiating table after the tougher approach taken by Trump. The hidden war against Iran and the non-hidden war against Iranian proxies makes this all very relevant for everyone in the region, Cardillo added. Vernon L. Peterson, head of the Department of International Studies at the American University of Sharjah, says the issue of the Palestinians remains firm in the UAE and in the wider Gulf. The UAE has taken a risk recognizing Israel, and what they need out of the elections is stability and a low-key approach to the West Bank, he added, saying that while the advantages of the Abraham Accords are huge, there are many still very aligned to the Palestinian cause. There is a very conservative part of the population raised on the plight of the Palestinians and the evil nature of the Israelis, he explained, not to mention that the UAE, and the Gulf in general, are filled with Palestinians. Most importantly, he said, the Gulf needs a government in Israel that will honor the accords and not do anything to rock the boat until the benefits of the new ties to Israel become obvious to everyone. Bahraini political consultant Ahmed Kouzé says it is only natural for there to be a stronger interest from Israel's Gulf allies in the wake of the peace accords because national elections are still vital in ultimately shaping diplomatic affairs and bilateral relations, for better or worse, and for the delicate role it will play between them and their major ally, the U.S. No one can deny the rising tensions between the Democrats and the Gulf states in the past decade, and how they, unlike the Republicans, favor Iran over the Arab Gulf states, Kouzé told the media line. However, he feels that the strength of the relationship between Israel and the U.S. can indeed work in favor of the Gulf states in the battle against Iran. While there is no official preference in Bahrain on who should be elected on March 23, Kouzé, who is based in Washington, says that the general feeling in Bahrain is that a re-election of Netanyahu will ensure a smooth transition of the process begun by the Abraham Accords. Who wins the election is not as important as how the new relationships between Israel and its Gulf allies move forward, however, according to Emirati political analyst Salem Al-Ketbi, who says economic cooperation and regional security are at the top of the agenda in bilateral relations. Gulf-Israeli relations are based on principles of pragmatic interest, he said, with common challenges uniting them along the way, though they are united in a desire for peace and developing mutually each one's economy. What is important for the incoming administration is to ensure they continue with the momentum of the huge economic and investment opportunities that can be activated and used between Israel and the Gulf states, he said. In related news, Mike Pompeo says many in Saudi Arabia seek normalized ties with Israel. Former U.S. Secretary of State expresses hope Gulf Kingdom joins peace pact. Former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said, many people in Saudi Arabia want normalized relations with Israel, voicing hope the kingdom will join the Abraham Accords agreed during former President Donald Trump's tenure. Pompeo, who served as Trump's CIA director and top diplomat, made the comments in a recorded video address to the Combat Antisemitism movement, which will give him its inaugural Global Leadership Award on Monday. Under the Abraham Accords brokered by Trump last year, 4 majority Arab states, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco and Sudan, agreed to establish ties with Israel. The Israeli press was rife with speculation about other Arab nations interested in joining the pact, with powerhouse Saudi Arabia widely regarded as a top prize for the Jewish state. Predicting the future has proven a struggle for me, Pompeo said in remarks shared with AFP, adding that he thinks many more countries will seek ties with Israel. I hope that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia can find its way to join the Abraham Accords. I know that many inside that country want that to take place, he noted. Sources in Jerusalem have said Pompeo and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in November in the Red Sea city of Neom. The meeting, denied by Riyadh, fueled frenzied speculation in Israel that a normalization deal might be close. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell so you can get notified whenever new Bible prophecy news videos are uploaded. Lastly, let us see how Iran is signaling credit for attacks on US, Israel and Saudi Arabia. Iran receives information directly from the Houthis on their alleged gains and their drone and missile attacks. Iran's regime is sophisticated, but it is also ham-handed in the way it takes credit for a string of recent attacks across the region. It openly brags about how it has been striking at Saudi Arabia, the US and Israel in the last 72 hours. Iran does this through messaging via state media in English. Press TV, for instance, has numerous headlines about the attacks. If Iran wasn't behind them, the headlines would all be to obfuscate Tehran's role. But Iran is behind them and Iran is pleased to show off. On February 28, Press TV tells us that Yemeni forces say sensitive Saudi targets hit by missile, drone strikes. This refers to the February 27 attacks that targeted Riyadh and other areas. Striking images showed what appeared to be Patriot air defenses intercepting the Iranian-backed Houthi ballistic missiles. Iran calls this the Yemen Army. It also said via Press TV that this same Yemen army was about to liberate Marib. Marib is controlled by the Saudi-backed government forces of Yemen. Saudi Arabia intervened in Yemen in 2015 to stop Iranian-backed Houthi rebels from taking Aden. Riyadh coordinated with the UAE and other key coalition partners at the time. Iran receives information directly from the Houthis on their alleged gains and their drone and missile attacks. It isn't like Iran's media relies on pro-Saudi media. It takes the information directly from the horse's mouth, the Houthi Ansarullah leadership. Whether Tehran ordered the vast attacks on February 27 is unclear. Sometimes it appears Iran media has details about these attacks before even Houthi media has the full details. This speaks to wider coordination between the IRGC, Iranian media such as Tasnim or Fars News, and the Houthis. Iranian media is sophisticated in this, it has its own reporters who get scoops and also do high-level interviews. It is not shy to showcase Iran's weapons and accomplishments and get quotes from Iranian-backed groups. But if the regime was displeased, these stories would disappeared. They don't, and that shows regime approval. Iran quotes the Houthis as saying attacks on Saudi Arabia will continue. Next in line for Iran's messaging via Press TV to the West in English, are stories bragging about how Iran says that the time is not ripe to speak to the US and Europe. The headline comes on February 28 after the Wall Street Journal headlined this story. Iran is pushing it too. Iran's point is that it controls the tempo and the narrative. US President Biden will wait for Iran, is the way Iran puts it. Next up is Iran's messaging on threats to the West if the International Atomic Energy Agency is tough on Iran. Headline number 3 at Press TV on Sunday evening is just that, a threat to respond. Iran messages these threats to then give them an excuse to respond. Iran doesn't just attack quietly, it messages before, during and after. Iran also says the US has illegal bases in Syria. After the Thursday airstrikes by the Biden administration on pro-Iranian groups in Syria, which followed an attack by Iran on Erbil and Baghdad in Iraq targeting the US, Iran is angry about the US role in Syria. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman has condemned recent attacks on areas east of Syria by US troops, saying the illegal bases run by American forces in the country are used to train terrorists for later use against the government in Damascus, Press TV reports. The message: these bases might be targeted by Iran. We know that pro-Iranian groups in Iraq have already threatened to respond, and there are rumors Iran may respond in Syria. US drones allegedly hovered over Al-Bakamel over the weekend seeking to deter such a response. Iran's Press TV says the US is transferring Daesh terrorists. It relies on Sana media in Syria for this conspiracy theory. Iran's media says the US bombed Iraq's anti-terror fighters in Syria. Iraqi resistance groups, Iran says, are not demanding an investigation of US attacks. Iran is also focused on Israel. It reported a meeting between Israel's defense minister Benny Gantz and the King of Jordan. The meeting was a secret, the report says. Iran also appears very interested in an attack on an Israeli-owned ship on Friday in the Gulf of Oman. Two of the must-read stories Press TV is pitching are on the attack on the ship. Iran's messaging here is clear as well. Iran likely attacked the ship, and by highlighting it, it is taking credit. Meanwhile, in its own media in Farsi, Iran has a slightly different list of stories at Fars and Tasnim. To start, they are more mundane and about rail lines and the economy. They carry the headlines about Iran rejecting meetings in Europe about nuclear issues. The Houthis are quoted about the precision missile strikes on Saudi Arabia. Iran's efforts in English to highlight all its proxies in the region, from Lebanon to Syria and Iraq and Yemen, as evidence of the full-court press it is using to escalate tensions with the US, Saudi Arabia, Israel, the Gulf and others. Iran takes credit for these incidents by showcasing them and not denying them. If Iran wanted to really obscure its involvement, it would quote more foreign reports and distance itself. The messaging by pro-Iran groups in Iraq and Syria also communicate future threats. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And stay tuned to Watchman Report for more Bible prophecy news. To learn how to receive forgiveness of sins and get your name in the book of life, visit beingjustified.com today. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. You better be able to prove from the Holy Scriptures alone that your name is written in the book of life before you die in your sins. Beingjustified.com can help you while in the land of the living.